So we should be able to start, right? So, okay. So this is the schedule as usual for next weeks. I mean, this week and next weeks. And it's the same. I just published the material for today and for tomorrow's lab. And then we will have the Easter vacation time. And we will resume on Monday, 28th of April. Okay, but there is still tomorrow for the lab. Okay. Okay, good. So today we are going to talk about forms. And forms are an important element that you need to have in your web applications because it's the way in which the user inserts the content, information, and so on. Okay. So we are going to talk about forms, how to handle them in React. So React has a peculiar way of handling forms because of the state that we saw last week. And now we will talk specifically how to use the state for the forms. Okay, and we are expecting you to use these methods, this system at the exam for handling forms. Okay, and for sure there will be a form in the exam because I mean without the form we cannot really design something useful in a web application. Okay. Okay, so as usual today we will see a little bit of theory, why setting forms in the way we are discussing here, and then we will practice on our example, the question and answer example, and tomorrow I think you will practice in the lab, but I think it's still about components and state, so just with the state. And if you are ahead of schedule, you can try forms, but there will be another lab for the forms after Easter. Okay? I will publish the lab maybe Wednesday. Okay? So you can have a look at the text, and in case you want to try, you can try. Okay, so we already talked a little bit about forms while discussing HTML. And we say that HTML has a peculiar way of how to say writing forms in the code. Okay, so there is a tag specific for forms, this name form. You have the input tag, input type, text, password, button, and so on. But there are also tags like button or the text area and stuff like that. Okay, and by the way, this inconsistency comes from the very old days of HTML. It was there in the first version of HTML. Okay, almost first version. Okay, and so the native HTML forms are inconsistent because they have to be backward compatible basically. Okay, depending on the type of input element, we can have for instance the content that needs to be handled by JavaScript in a different way. I mean, we cannot just read the value property like in a text area, like we do in an input text or stuff like that. And also events, they work a little bit different depending on the form control, so the form tag that we are going to use. And luckily, we have React, and React flattens this behavior, exposing a more uniform interface through the JSX. Okay, what does this mean? It means that we have the virtual DOM instead of the actual DOM. And in the virtual DOM, everything is consistent, is well designed and well done. Okay, and since JSX refers to the virtual DOM, we only work with JSX inside the React, and so we have no problems about the ones that we just described. Okay, so events are consistent. We can use the same attributes and so on to read the content of the forms and so on. So this is a good news because React takes care of mapping this consistent way of handling forms to the actual DOM, okay, for each browser and so on. But actually here it's for the HTML. Okay, so minimum set of things you need to know about forms. Well, there is a very important attribute that is the value that always holds the current value of the field or the form control, depending on what it is, like a radio button and so on. But if it's text, basically value contains the actual text that is written inside the form control, or the actual selection in case of selections, single, multiple, and so on. Okay. And note that there is another attribute which is called default value that holds the default value that was set when the field was created. So when you create something, you would like to have a default value that is then destroyed or changed by the user, and you need to use this default value attribute. You cannot use the value attribute because the value attribute in React, in JSX, will force the content of the form, of the field inside the form to be the value that you set. So it needs to be changed dynamically, as we will see in a minute. Okay, and so how to set a value just for initializing the field, just use default value instead of value. Okay, while in normal HTML it's not like this, it would be value. Okay, because then the user can change the content. But in JSX we have this concept, as we will see in a minute, where React controls what is shown, and so the value will always correspond to what we want to show. Okay. React also provides a very consistent on-change event that we will use a lot in our forms. Okay, we will basically always handle the on-change event that is fired by React every time the user changes something in the form inputs. It types a new character, it deletes a character, it changes the selection of a radio button or a list and stuff like that. Okay, so every time the user changes something, the on-change event is fired, of course, on the input where we attach the callback. Okay, so we will have to attach a callback to each one of the elements of the inputs of the form. Okay. So on-change fires, so started is called even when typing just a single character or deleting a single character into an input or text area field. Okay, so every time the user does something, we are notified, and we can act through a callback. And it works consistently, as we said. Okay. An event handler, we already saw what it is. It's just a callback function. It's just called with the one parameter, remember, an event object, and we have access to the element that created the call to the callback through event.target. Okay, it's called target, but remember it's the source of the event, so it's the input where the user has changed something and so on. If we attach it to the on-change event. Okay. And of course, some events, depending on the categories, have more specific properties. I think, yeah, there's just an example here. But I mean, we typically use only very basic properties because we are interested basically in the value of the form input. Okay. So in case of a form element, we have the target value. Okay, target is event.target.value. That's a current input value. Event.target.name is also very, very useful because it's the name we assigned in the JSX or in the HTML, but in this case in JSX because in React we write JSX and we assigned it to a certain element. Okay, let's say you have two text fields and you call it first name, last name. That's the name you give to the control so you can distinguish them. Okay, when you are using the value. Okay, you know that the value refers to first name, last name, whatever, address, and so on. Okay, so the target is this property, and the events we can use are quite a lot, but I will say in our applications there are basically two events that are more important because we need to handle them in short. That is the on-change that we just saw, and for the forms also the on-submit, because we need to prevent the submission of the form. Submission of the form is the way in which all applications work. Okay, so send the information to a server and reload the page, which is something that we don't want. Okay, and we will see how to use it. And of course, I mean, it's not related to forms, but the on-click is also important. You have buttons and stuff like that. You want to be notified about the user clicking on certain elements in your user interface, typically buttons. Okay, defining event handlers, in practice we already did it, but I mean, just a brief recap. You just define a function, and of course you have the option to do it as an arrow function, as a function expression, as you like. I mean, it doesn't really matter as long as we pass a reference to a function. Okay, so if you don't use the this as, I mean, typically you don't have to use the this. It doesn't change, I mean, for you using either the arrow or the function syntax. When you pass it to event handlers or properties and so on, of course you need to pass the reference to the function. Okay, so you cannot pass the returning value of the function. We did a mistake last Thursday, right? And one of you spotted the mistake. I mean, we forgot to pass a function, and we passed actually, we wrote like this. So we called the function, and basically we passed the return value of the function. It was, I think, undefined or something like this. And of course, we cannot just pass the name of the function, okay? A string or stuff like that. Just be careful. If you need to pass parameters to this function that is handling events, what can you do? Well, actually, you just define a function, for instance, with the arrow function syntax, and just, you know, do whatever you like. You want to pass 2 parameters, or you want to call the function in some ways, no problem, okay? So just define a function that takes, well, in this case it takes nothing, but actually React always passes as first parameter this event object that has event target, event prevent default, and so on. Okay, if we don't put anything here, it means we just don't need it. Okay, otherwise we have this event object from which we can get the target and so on. Okay, so in short, we can recycle the same callback, and depending on the parameter that has been passed, we can distinguish the various cases. Okay, sometimes it's useful. Okay, good. So let's come to the point that is the main point of today's lecture. We have forms, and forms have a state because the user types or selects or do something that needs to remain set in the application. Okay, so like think about the simplest example. It's a text form, right? So you type your name. When you type your name, there's a content, this name. So it's a value that of course it's a value that has to be stored somewhere. Okay, and the point is that in normal HTML, the browser takes care of remembering this value, right? You can write some HTML as you did a few labs ago. If you open a form, input type text, it works. You can type stuff, right? There's no React, no state, nothing, and it works. Who is handling the content of the form? Well, actually the browser, okay? But you remember last week on Thursday we said, well, actually React should handle the state, not, you know, something else. Something else. I mean, the browser, the DOM, and so on. It's React handling the state. That's this useState function and so on. And so, how do we match the two things? Okay. So it's a problem, right? And of course, we will see the solution in a moment. So to correctly render the component from the virtual DOM, actually React needs to know which value must be set in the form element. So React renders the element of the form, so this input type text, so this text field where you have your name, and when it renders the field, it needs to know which value has to be put inside, so it has to be shown. Okay, and so it means that React needs to have a state where, that holds this value. But also, what happens when the user types something? Well, we should attach an event handler to this situation, so this onChange event, notify React of the fact that the user has changed something, change the value, so change the state inside React, and React will do the rest. It will update the visualization. Okay, that's the principle of React. You change a state, and the state is the visualization is updated according to the state. Okay, so React needs to know which value must be set in the form element, and so it means that on every change, every single change, even typing a character, deleting a character, changing a selection, and so on, React must be notified to get the new value and update the component state. And in turn, this will re-render the component, and so will make the change appear in the user interface. Okay. So the point is now, where is the source of truth? What does it mean? So I have a state in React which holds a value, and there is also a state, a value in HTML that holds a value, right? So we need to decide which one we want to use, okay? And according to the React principles, we should use the left approach, okay? So the so-called controlled form components. When the React components holds in its state the value to be shown in the form element, it is named a controlled form component. So we define a state which actually corresponds to what is shown currently inside the component of the form. So this input text and so on. We could use another approach, okay? But that's just, let's say, theory. We don't want you to use this approach, okay? Because it's pretty confusing. So let HTML and the browser handle the state, okay? And when we need that state, read the value from the actual HTML element. But this is difficult. We don't actually see the HTML element directly from React. It is possible to do that, but we will not show how to do it. If you do it at the exam, you need to really explain everything about why and how you did it. So it's really, I would say forbidden, almost forbidden, okay, for the exam. Because we have React that handles the state, and just use the state of React. We learn today how to use this state for the forms. That will not, there will be forms for the exam, but not really 100 forms. Just probably one form or two, not more. Okay, so it's a pretty simple situation where you practice in the lab and you just adapt it for the exam. Okay. And these different ways of handling the form is called uncontrolled form, okay? And a component like this is an uncontrolled form component, and we don't want you to use it, okay? Because we break some assumptions made by React, okay? That React has a state and decide what appears on the screen, okay? Okay, so let's see the controlled form components. How do they work? Actually, we define a component in React as usual. So there's a function something, that's the name of the component, and it uses useState to create a state that holds the state. Okay, here we are showing the case in which, for instance, we have a string, so like an input box where you type something. Okay, and so you have const x, set x, that's the name of the state. You can give the name you like. An initial value, typically empty, but depends on the form. And then there's this form element which is rendered. It can be like input type text or stuff like that. And this is rendered by React. And how it is rendered? Well, in the way in which we say to render it. So we will say value equal to x. Okay, x is the variable that in React contains the state. Okay, and we will also set onChange equal to something that is a function that basically is fired every time the user changes something in the form element. And on change, we will call the set state function of React, and we will update the state using the new value. And you see how easy it is. Event.target.value. Okay? And the value simply replaces the old value in the state of React. And this will in turn make React re-render the form element showing the new value, okay, that is x, that is taken and updated actually from the user change. Okay? But note that here in this function we can do many things. We are not, it's not mandatory to use the value that is contained actually here. So what the user has done, we can change, okay, the value in case it's needed. Like, you know, you type in a form, and even if you don't have the uppercase lock, okay, the caps lock on, everything you type is uppercase. Why? Because here, before setting the state, we can make everything uppercase. You can limit the number of characters you can type. You can do checks, whatever you like. Okay? And what is rendered actually depends on React, and actually it is what is set in the state. Okay? If we are just in HTML, just as an example, we would have to capture this event and basically replace the content of the value, but everything is to be done manually. With React, it's just about changing the state, and the state triggers a re-render of the component. So it just shows the new value automatically. Okay, so setting the value plus as here for the form element, plus setting the onChange handler with something reasonable, it makes the form component fully controlled. Okay, that's the way in which we would like to code our form elements. Very simple, I would say. Once, of course, we try. First time it looks a bit weird maybe, but then you will get quickly used to this approach. Okay, so some code. So my form, const name, set name, use state, initially it's empty, it's an empty string. Input type text, value name, you see the name is what I've given as a name for the state. On change, handle change, and the handle change is here on the right, set name, event target value. Okay, very simple input type text. I mean, I type something, it gets set into the state, and simply the state will render the component exactly with what I've written inside the form. Okay, good. Let's do one step more. You see here, return form on submit, handle submit. So we also capture the on submit event, which is typically the event that happens when you type a return somewhere inside the form. Okay, because of historical reasons. And remember that we need to do event.prevent default, because otherwise this will submit the form to the server and will reload our application, which is something that we already said many times we don't want to happen. Okay, you could specify a path and so on, but it is for the old ways of programming web applications. Okay, and we are not going to follow that approach. So that's basically all for creating a single element inside a form. Okay, of the easiest one, input type text. Okay, just for your for completeness, for your knowledge, in case you want to use an uncontrolled form component, the situation would be like this: no React state. So it's a problem for us. We don't know when things change. React cannot act in this case, and so on. So it will not re-render, and etc. And you have to set a default value on submit and stuff like that. And basically on submit, you collect the values from the form. But you have no control basically what's happening when the user is modifying the information inside the forms. Okay? And also, React has no control about what is shown and when to re-render things and so on. And if it has something to re-render, it will destroy the value inside the form because nobody says which value you should set, okay? Because it has no state. So they are problematic for React, and so we will not describe nor use them, okay? Just that's all for for uncontrolled form components. I will not talk about this anymore, okay? And if I see an uncontrolled form at the exam, for sure I will ask why, and I'm 99% sure that you will not have a good answer to this, to this question, because there's no actual reason. I could tell reasons, but I don't want to tell you, okay? Because I mean they're not happening at the exam. Okay, very specific conditions in which you really need to have the HTML element accessible and so on, and something which is outside the scope of this lecture. Okay, so form submission. On submit, it's an event generated by the form tag. Every time you have a form tag, you should make sure that you handle the on submit event because you only have one thing to do. Well, at least one thing to do. Event prevent default, okay? So that you don't reload the page. And also typically in this situation, when you want to submit a form, the user has filled in every information that is needed. And so typically you process the information like first name, last name, address, and zip code, whatever. You want to check consistency, you want to check whatever you want to check inside the form, you can do the operations in the handler of the onSubmit form. Of course, I mean, you don't want to do it every time a single character changes, okay? It might make sense for the single element because, like I said before, you want everything uppercase, that's fine. But the consistency of all the fields can only be checked when you want to submit the form, so when everything is finished. How do you submit the form? Typically with the enter key or with the input type submit button, okay? Button type submit. That's the button that will submit the form, okay? You can use it, but you need to handle the on submit event because pressing that button, it will create a submit event, okay? Okay, so this is the typical place where you would like to validate all form data before proceeding with the rest of your code. Okay, you can use validators. We saw validators. I mean, they came in different flavors. We saw them for server. Okay, but I think yes, there is a package you can run on the client as well in case it's needed. Like, I mean, you don't write your code for checking, if an email is correct and so on. Just use, libraries. Okay, and this one is basically shares the code more or less with all the validators, but it's just more suitable for running in the client because the other was looking at content coming from the client in an HTTP request, and this one is just for passing strings and checking if the content is valid or not. Okay, good. Okay. So that's the last slide, and then we will code. Today we will spend quite a lot of time coding. Okay, I know that, and we know that controlled form components can be, let's say, boring to write because you need to use this approach. You see, there's an element, and you need to have a state, and then you need to have the onChange handler, and make sure that the onChange handler works well, and so on. And this is for each element in your form. So it becomes boring after a while, okay? Especially if you have many different fields and so on, okay? And so just, as an advice, in case you get tired of writing all this code, there are libraries that can help you to do this task. But I mean, at the exam, I don't see this library used so much, also because there are not so many forms and so many elements inside each form. I mean, maybe we ask for 3-4 things. I mean, and it's easier to write directly the code needed to handle each state than learning how to use a library. This is more an advice for, you know, when you go out for and you work with React, and, you know, make sure you don't repeat code too much. It's true that today there are things like ChatGPT and so on that can help you write and cut and paste and stuff, but I mean, there are also libraries that can help you in, you know, performing things more efficiently, including validation and so on. Okay, so basically that's for the theory, and so we will now try to use this approach and apply it to our example. Okay, that's the question and answer example. And not tomorrow, but the lab after Easter, you will apply it to your lab, so the film list, film library, and basically you will include a form that allows you to insert a new film. Okay, not on the back end, you are not yet connected with the server, but you can at least add it into the list of films, so in the memory, in JavaScript memory. In this case, it will be a state of React. And today, we do the same thing as well. Okay? So, let's open Visual Studio Code. The example is already online. So, as usual, in the schedule, well, maybe I forgot to link the directory explicitly, but basically it's, you know, the same directory, just week 8. Okay, that's week 7. We had the React QA state, and in week 8, we already have some code to start, which is basically the same from which we left on Thursday. Okay, let me just check. I think there was an example. I can show you an example. Yeah, very simple example before we start coding on our application. So let me show the example. So just open a terminal as usual, week 8 example form. I need to install everything, npm ce. Okay, what's available? A new version of npm, I think. Okay, well, it doesn't matter. npm run dev. Okay, let's open the application. Oops, that's very simple stuff. I mean, it's a form that contains an input type submit, and that's a button, and an input type text, and that's a field where you can type something. Okay, and I will open the components here on the right, so they're just my form. Let's see the code first. Source up. Okay, so that's basically the example we saw on the slides, right? So input type text, you see value name, and the name is a state, React state. Okay, and then submit value submit. This value just what is written on the button. Buttons don't have a value. I mean, you cannot type inside the buttons, right? I mean, you can assign a value, but it's what is written on top of the button. And you will see that every time I type something, the state gets updated. So let me show you. You see the state here. Now it's the empty string. We started with the empty string. You say type the character, and it appears here. Okay, and then again, and okay, I'm typing lowercase actually. Okay, uppercase, lowercase. I'm deleting stuff. Okay, and it's what is happening is what I told you before setting the state. Set name. You can do modifications. You can make everything uppercase. I cannot type lowercase in this form. Actually, I'm typing lowercase. What the code gets here is the value which is lowercase. Okay, but then it's made uppercase. It's set as a value of the state, and React renders the value that is set as a state, because I wrote here value equal to name. Okay, so let me just do console log just for debugging, just to make sure you understand everything. Target value. Okay, so I open the console now here. I'm typing lowercase. You see, this is lowercase, right? But it appears uppercase. Okay, that's what's inside the form. Okay, so I can delete things. I can write web. Okay, every time, why it becomes uppercase every time? Because every time it's reread from the form, the form control, the input type text. Okay, because it's set at the previous step by React as a value, and then it's read in the event handler. Okay, that's important to understand how things are. I mean, the order in which things are happening. Okay, good. So it's a really basic example. You see here, they are not bootstrap buttons and stuff like that. Really basic stuff. Okay, so you have a really basic example you can play with in case you want to play just with something very simple. Okay, and so now let's go to our example. I mean, the final is just for me, just for copy and paste in case we are late. But we have the React QA form that is what is published. So I need to install the stuff. Yes. npm run dev open. That's too big, right? Okay. So that's the stuff we had the last time. I mean, the buttons work. Okay? And we need to have a form, an additional form, where we can type something new and add something to the list of the answers. Okay? And so let's try to code it. Compared to last time, I just modified the button. I think it was vote. Now there are two buttons, vote up and vote down, and the function takes also the delta. So you add the delta and you can do +1, -1, and this kind of things. But really simple stuff. And you can always see the difference with the previous code in the Git. Okay, just go back in one commit and you will see the difference. Okay, so how how do we add a form? Well, write a form control in JSX in some component. So we write a component and we add some fields, and we see how to handle them later. Okay, so my recommendation is to keep things ordered if possible. So in source we have up. Oh, that's the other one. Okay, up that has the header, footer, and question description is in questions in component. The answer table is in these components. We could make maybe another file for components. Okay, just to keep things ordered. I mean, you can write things wherever you like, but if you have a little bit of order in your code, it's always good. Form components, right? Components, JSX. It's empty. Right? Let me see what we did so we don't do anything. I mean, we are not doing anything wrong, but it makes it easier to finish the example later. So we design a new component that will hold the form. Okay? Function, new component, a new React component, form, answer form. Okay? Answer form. Props, of course. So we also rehearse a little bit how to create a component. Okay? And then, well, return what? Form. Okay? form, and then we put an input type something. I think it's input type something, right? Well, this code is more complex than I want to. Let's use the Bootstrap stuff. Okay. So first, let me import Bootstrap. React Bootstrap. Import. What's the import name? Yeah, something from React Bootstrap. Okay. And so actually form, uppercase form is something from Bootstrap, React Bootstrap. Okay. It just make things nicer. Okay, we could write form, input type, and so on as we did before. It's fine. Okay, but just to have consistency with the rest of the application, and also to practice a little bit with React Bootstrap, we just try to use its components. If you are unsure, what are you supposed to do apart from asking ChatGPT, which is not really recommended? But React Bootstrap forms. Okay, and you will see some examples. Okay, you will see stuff like here and the code. Okay, form group, form label, form control, type email, type text, and so on. Okay, so basically we are taking example from here and designing our forms. Okay. Okay, as usual, we try to focus on the important things first, because time is always limited. And so, React Bootstrap is organized in this way. It has, as you saw before, it has form control. So it's the form control is a property of form. It's fine, okay, and it makes things well sorted, okay, for usage. Let's just put text. That's the simplest stuff, okay. Well, actually, it works more or less like the input type text, okay. It's type text, okay. I use the double quotes. It doesn't really matter. Strings are the same. I need to give a name. It's a good practice. Okay, I'm not sure if it will be used or not. It depends on the validation I'm going to do on the form, and if I'm taking this information, I'm sending it to the server. Maybe I need this name. So just give a name to each element in your form. Okay, name is the text. It's the answer. Okay, so it's a text that is answer text, if you like. Okay, and then we have a value. You remember the slide, right? So the slide is where is the slide? Value is the state. So we need a state. So const. What's the name of the state I gave? I gave text again. Set text equal use state initial value. I don't know. I could leave it empty, but I mean it's a string. Let's use the empty string. We will check it later if it works or not. So this is text. Okay. And then, we have the onChange handler, of course. Change. And then we need a function. We can try to write the function directly here. Let me go new line. Okay. Let's try to use the arrow function here. So here we take the event, okay, and set of the state. Set text. Event target value. Okay, yeah, and basically it's all. Okay, so I close the form control. There's nothing we need to put in between the open and close tag. Good. More or less it's all. Okay, I mean, we want to do nice things. You have the form label but I mean this is really just for show text. Okay. Okay, good. Now we need to use the answer form somewhere, right? But before being able to use it in the app, that is the place where we render the page, we need to export it. Okay. Yes, export. Export. You can make the default export. You can make a named export, whatever you want. Okay. Just if you have a default export, you can only export one element, but yeah. Just make sure things work. I mean, if they don't work, the byte will tell you. Okay. So where do we put the form? Well, let's do a new row. Okay. Row. Row. Okay. Call. I remind you, these are rows and calls of the React layouting system. Okay, this is not a table. The table is inside the answer table. Okay, call, and then we have answer form, right? Answer form. Okay. I think no props for the moment. Okay, I saved. Let's see the result. Good. That's something at least. Okay. That's a text that is just a label, and then there's a place where we can type things. Okay, let's check if the state works. Components, answer form. Okay, answer form. This is the state. Let's delete stuff. Okay. Here you can make the uppercase, lowercase, whatever you want. We take the value and we set it to the state. So it's exactly what the user is typing. Okay? Good. So we have a form with one control. That's good. Okay? Okay, good. So now we are handling the submission of the form. Okay? Form. On submit, yes, on submit, we define a function to handle the submission, handle submit. Okay, where is this function? And nowhere. I mean, we need to define it. I think I used function, handle submit. Okay. What does it take as a parameter? Well, it needs to take at least one thing, because here we need to do event prevent default. Okay, so this event has to be passed here. Yes. Okay, so handle submit. We need to pass this event. How can we pass the event? Well, actually, it's automatically passed by React, okay? Because the callbacks that you put on the on event, okay, on submit, on click, on change, and so on, are called as with the first parameter equal to the event, okay? So we don't have to write anything here, okay? If you really want to make things explicit, you can write something like this, okay? Handle submit event. But you're just introducing a new function, okay? It's not needed. If I want a second parameter here, yeah, of course, I need to write in this way. But if no second parameter is needed, this is enough, okay? So let's just remove this stuff. Okay, good. And then console log, console log is just for debugging a little bit, and we'll see, let me answer text, and then, well, I'm not sure, yeah, I could use the template literal, whatever you like, but I mean, let's keep things simple, okay? Text, okay, good. I need a submit button, okay? Submit button, I think, yes, button. Okay, it's a React Bootstrap button, so I need to import it. Button. Okay. Button. Just type submit, and what are we going to write here? Send, save, I don't know, submit. Okay, submit is a bit strange, you know, for the user. You know what it means, but typical user doesn't know. Save. Okay. Okay, save. Let's check the result. Okay. Okay, so now we have a form that has an onSubmit handler, and there's a button save, which is of type submit. How do we know it's of type submit? Well, actually we don't know. From the view we cannot know. Okay, we need to inspect the code. Okay, so console, let's clean stuff, save. That doesn't work. I think I need to reload the stuff, or maybe I forgot something. Yeah, it works. Now, Vite tries to hot reloading everything, but sometimes, you know, we do too many modifications, there's a state involved and so on. Just reload the application, make sure everything is started correctly. Okay, good. And so if we change something else, save again. Okay, so when you save, it means you submit the form, we do the prevent default. I can remove the prevent default just to show you just once. Okay, what happens? I mean, save, and you see the application reloads. If I spot something like this at the exam, a few points less. Okay, because these are single page applications. They're not supposed to reload themselves. Indeed, you know, we lost the state. Okay, and that's a problem for a single page application. So just, you know, retry without problems. Okay, save, and that's the text. And then of course we can create other fields, right? Let's try the date. Okay, date. Let's create another form control, date. Let me save this stuff. So what's the time? Yes, I will commit this so you have it in case you want to have a look. QA, right? These tools. So first step, first input field during the lecture. Push, no, push, yeah. Okay. So now we put a second element. Okay, and the second element I'm going to copy pasting it. It's a date. Basically it's the same. I mean, just form, label, and so on. Okay, oops, sorry. No. Okay, so actually if you look at the example in here, it recommends to use form group. I mean, you know, follow these examples. Okay, I just typed I would say first thing it came to my mind. Okay, but you know, to group together elements inside the form, especially labels with their controls, you're supposed to use this form group, and it's also a place where you can set an ID of the control and so on, and you know, something useful for later. Okay, so let's go back to the example. So date, type date, name date, value date, on change, event, set date, but I missed the state, right? Const date, date set date. This is really standard. Date, use date, And what I'm writing here is initialization value. Well, actually, I do how I do represent dates. Well, actually, well, in this case, you need to experiment a little bit, search a little bit on the internet and in the documentation and so on, and you will discover basically that this control type date means that when it is shown, it's nice because it shows the calendar and you can click and and you can do whatever you need for selecting your date. Okay, everything has been already implemented for you by HTML5, React Bootstrap, and so on. Actually, don't really know. It depends on what they did in React Bootstrap. But the important thing is what's the format of the information that is coming back to me. So what is the information that is setting value so that I can use it in my code? Well, I'm not sure. Just do console log, okay? Just I'm trying to do what you are supposed to do in the lab. I mean, for experimenting, okay? So just console log event target value. Okay, I could have printed the state at a certain point, but I mean, it doesn't really matter. Let's reload. Okay, and let's try to select a date. That's today's date. Okay, we will come to this point later. 2025-04-14. It looks like a string. It's fine. That's a format that comes from React Bootstrap form control type date. Okay, so you need to handle strings that represent dates in this format. Okay, year, month, date. That's all. Okay, so strings are fine. Okay. Okay. So let's see. What's the problem here? A component is changing uncontrolled input to be controlled. This is likely caused by the value changing from undefined to a defined value, which it should not happen. Okay? Well, actually, it happens that in the first render of the field with the date, I set the empty string, no, the undefined, sorry. Yes, it's undefined because I didn't set anything in the initialization. And basically the control was not able to match this undefined. It had to set something, okay? And so it wonders if we are using the controlled or uncontrolled approach, okay, for this element in the form. And so it basically says, just be careful, okay? And I'm not sure if the empty string works. Let's try. So again, I think now it works. So basically the empty string in some ways is interpreted by React, the React Bootstrap form control type date as an empty string. Okay, so first time you render, there's no date. Okay, or you need to pass today's date, whatever you want, and of course you need to ask the system which is today's date and so on. So in case you want, you can initialize this this value with something different, like import. We need the day.js to do this, right? Day.js, and then I think now what's the day.js? Yes, I never remember all the syntax and stuff, as you like. Format, and now you know the format because basically we guessed it from the console log, and the format is year, month, date. Okay, yes, save it, test it. Okay, and so we start with today's date. Okay, and you want to change it, you can change it, and you get the new value. Okay, it's the same system. We just need to be careful about the format of the data. Okay, data wants a certain format. If you have numbers, as we will have numbers in a minute, we need to make sure it's a number. Okay, so let me delete the console log here. Okay, and format this stuff a little bit better. Okay, I don't still like where do you want change. Okay. The form group, I invite you to use these form groups. I will finish the form groups later after the lecture. Okay, but unless I copy and paste. Okay, save. Still working, yes. Okay, so let's put a number. So we have all the three cases that we need, basically. That's a place I'm going to copy from. Okay, copy, paste. Form group label score, type number. Name score, value score, on change, handle score. Okay? So, const score. So that's the tedious part, you know, the boring part. Every time you have a new control, you need to create a new state. Right? Score, right? Score, set, score. Use date. Use date. Of course, this is a number. I mean, it's easy. Let's start with a number. Otherwise, we mess up, you know, with the control again. Okay, good. Okay, we need the handle function, handle score. Okay, function, handle score. I think, well, here you can just, you know, set the score, score, event target value, and of course we need to receive event. Okay, I mean, actually, just in this way we wrote a function which is not an arrow function directly there, but we could also, you know, do checks in case we need checks. Like, we would like to have a positive score. We avoid writing setting negative values. I mean, we need to decide what happens in case you set a negative value. Okay, if less than 0, then set the score 0, whatever you like. I don't know, it depends on the application logic. That's what you need to think for the exam. Okay, depending on the requirements that you will have. Okay, what makes sense for the application. Okay, and since sometimes you have to write some code and so on, that's why I've taken this function out of the inline definition with the arrow function, because it's easier to read and write and so on. Okay, good. So, well, you might wonder if it's a nice design, I have date, text, score, and so on, I can make things aligned with the columns and so on. I would answer, I don't care at the moment. Okay, don't lose time on these things. You will have time later for, I don't want to say the exam, because I mean, at the exam we don't really care so much about these things, because we care about is the form controlled, is the state set correctly, no warnings in the console about you know, using the control in an unexpected way and so on. These are the important things. And then if you want to make things nicer and so on, I mean, it's fine. But I mean, this is a bit difficult because the previous one is a table and this one is another component. So either I add a row to the table, or actually keeping things aligned, it becomes difficult. Okay, that's why I don't want to spend time on this. Good. So let's finish the form, and then I will handle the submission, and we will try to add the element to the list of answers. Okay, so let me copy last time, yet another time, I would say. Just the last field I'm missing, that is the respondent, right? No, I've broken the application. Something, yeah, respondent, of course. It's the respondent. Let's delete all the stuff. Respondent, it's empty in the beginning. Use state. Oh, I deleted the wrong part. Sorry. Use state. Yeah. That's for later. Okay. Okay, good. I moved the button at the end just because, I mean, this is so nice and so easy, sorry. And okay. And I could space it and so on again, and don't care. Let's see if everything is working. Let's have a look at the components. Components, that's the answer form. You see there are 4 components. Does what is written here match what is written here? Yes. Okay. You can change the number, you can type the number you want. It will update. Okay, good. So now we have 4 fields inside our for. They are all controlled. So it means that each one has its own state. They work. Okay. And we need to handle the save button, right? Actually, the save just do console log. I would like to add the information to the list of the answers. Okay. Good. So let's do that. How can I add something to a state which does not belong to the answer form? So to this component. We saw last time. You need to pass a function from the place where the state is, so the answer table, okay, to here. And we will call that function, adding the information, and then React will re-render and will create a new list of answers with the new one. Okay? So answer form is here. Answer form is here, and we have it here in the tree of the element tree of React. Okay? And where is the state? Well, actually, we are lucky. The state is here in main. Actually, I did it on purpose last time, right? Because if the state was inside answer table, we could not pass anything, you know, from answer table to answer form, because they are at the same level. We cannot go back in the tree and go down in another direction. Okay? So that's what we said last time. In this case, we need to lift the state up, and if you are not lucky, you will reach up, and it's fine. We will have state in up. Up is the root, so everything has visibility to up. Okay? In this case, main is enough. Okay? Because main has as children both answers table and answer form. That's fine. Okay? So we have answers here. We don't need the answers. We need a function like add answer that operates on the answers. But actually, we just pass the function. We don't need to pass the state, because the answer form doesn't render the answer list. You just need to modify the list. Okay. So let me see what we brought here. Add answer. Okay. So you remember how to change an array of objects with the state we saw last time? I don't remember. Well, no, I'm joking, but more or less. I mean, you are in the lab, you are alone. You are not alone in the lab, you are alone at home, right? So, where are the slides? Okay, materials. Just check the slides, okay? So, adding, right, items, okay? So set of the state with the old value, the new value depends on the old value. You need to pass a callback. So set answers, okay? I think answer list, answer list, and return answer list and the new answer, okay? Answer. I want a lowercase one. Okay, answer is just a parameter. It's an object passed by return. No, just something like this because it's an arrow function, right? If I write return, I need to open the bracket. Okay, add answer. Add answer now is something that we are going to pass here. Add answer. Add answer. Okay. I hope so. Yes, good. And then we go to the other component where we are receiving. So save, we are receiving here as props, add answer, and we will use it. Right? Let's create an object so it's clearer and also easier to handle. Okay. So const ans is so text score respondent and date. Yeah, we will fix it later. So the console log not needed anymore, and we are doing this props add answer. So why it doesn't appear? Ans. Okay. Let's check. Let's open the console. I'm not sure I typed everything correctly. Yes, until now, yes. So save. Let's see if it works. Yeah, more or less. e.date.format is not a function. Where is it? Answer component, row 19. Okay? Row 19, answer component. So eDate should be an object of type DayJS, so it has the method format. Okay? So when I create a new object, and that's why I created a new object, I need to create the fields in the way that the rest of the code, the functions expect. So if I decided in my code that in the answer list I keep the dates as DayJS objects, when I create a new object, of course I need to create a DayJS object for the date. Otherwise, at a certain point it breaks down like it did before. Okay? Good. So let's try again. So type something. Save. Great. So we can have a break, right? So you see, I didn't do anything really special for re-rendering the list. It's React's magic. Okay? So we change the state of the list of answers and it appears simply. Of course, everything needs to be set correctly. The date is expected in the DayJS, not format, but as a DayJS object. I need to create the date as a DayJS object and so on. I just need to be consistent inside my code. Okay? But, more or less, that's all for, creating through a controlled form a new element in your list. And the same can be done for the film library in the lab, not tomorrow, but after Easter. Okay, so I would say now, since it's a bit long, we can break a little bit, like 10 minutes, okay? And then we will still modify this example a little bit, because I don't really like that this form is always there on if I'm just browsing the list, right? I would like to have a button like add, and the form appears. And if I change my mind, I don't want to add anything, cancel, the form disappears, and so on. But you will see that with these states, it becomes easier to program the behavior of your application. We just create a state, show form, or not showing the form, and the rest is done by React. Okay? Okay, so let's break. If you have any questions or answers in the break, of course, you're welcome to ask. Or, well, before the break. No questions, right? Okay. So let's start again. Restart again in 10 minutes. Okay, so let's have a break. Thanks.